The Fury of Firestorm, The Nuclear Men, written by Joe Harris, art by Yildiray Sinar. This is not an origin story. This is just the next chapter, but it kind of is an origin story. It's confusing. So, after the last issue where they beat Posar and like some other stuff with the Firestorm protocols, they de-transformed and then walked away. It turns out that they lost their powers there, seemingly. So Jason is in the lab, like the chemistry lab, because I guess, they were just allowed to go back to school again. I guess, none of the whole hunted down by Zithertech or whatever was involved anymore. So they just went back down to school. And Jason's just doing some lab experiment, and his lab partner, Suzanne, is in the room. And Jason completely zoned out, forgot she was there. She needs to go out and make a call. And as she does so, Jason turns on the Bunsen burner and just puts his hand like straight over it. And he's like, come on, give me some of that juice back. And as he's focusing on the fire in his hand, which seemingly isn't burning him, he gets a vision in his mind very briefly of Fury is there again. And so he freaks out, he yanks his hand away, and he's like, what the hell? What happened? And remember that Jason had the power to transmute. So when Suzanne comes back into the room after he freaks out, like all the lab equipment is turned into helium balloons they're just like floating around. And he's like, Suzanne, I gotta go. So at this point he runs down and talks to Ronnie, who's just getting out of football practice. And he goes down to the locker room and Ronnie's like, hey, what do you want? Like, we're not really buds. So what could you possibly want from me? And he's like, oh, well, someone had to do your trig homework. And he just hands it over. And they basically talk about, like, all right, so what are you doing? And Ronnie is like, oh, well, I'm just going to do well at this football, get into college football, and hopefully the scholarships can just see me through on that. And he's like, no, how are you doing in terms of, like, the powers? And he's like, we don't have our powers anymore, Jason. He's like, no, but here's the thing, like, they're back. Like, I just transmuted something. Like, our abilities are back. Maybe it's worth it in order for us to, like, try it out again. And Ronnie just freaks out, throws a fist into the locker and says, like, no, I just got my normal life back. I ain't doing this again. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna be a normal teenager. I'm gonna like chase girls. I'm gonna play football. And that's it. Bye. And as he walks away, we see that the the dent that he left in the locker is sizzling. And Jason's like, okay, I see what's happening here. So it's game night, I guess, and Ronnie's out on the field. Jason's in the stands because he's like, something's going to happen. Like, I need to be here for this because something's going to happen. And as they're down in the fourth quarter, big final play, Ronnie suddenly has that same rush that like Jason had, and he freaks out for a second, and Jason can feel it in the air. These names, man. And right as the play's about to start, we see a giant thing of lightning strike down on the field. And it turns out it's Helix. Helix was the, like, I'm pretty sure it was, like, Nazi-based. Maybe it was, like, super American. I can't remember. Point being is that he was a character I definitely loved because of how stupid his dialogue was. And he shows up back here on the field, and he's like, hey, you've got the Firestorm protocols. I want them. I'm going to kill you for them. And Ronnie's like, no, please, I don't have them anymore. Help. And he starts getting knocked around by Helix. Jason comes out on the field and stands up, and he's like, hey, I got him just as much as you do. And he's like, yeah, but you got the transmuting side, and that kid's got the fireball side. I want the fireball side. So they freak out for a minute trying to dodge, and he's just like, okay, Ronnie, we don't have a choice. I'm sorry. Hopefully this works. And he grabs hold of Ronnie, and they both transform into Firestorm. Thing is, though, they transform into one Firestorm. It is Ronnie who is like the body and like, I guess, the driver's seat, more or less. And then Jason is in the passenger seat, like mentally. And he's able to tell Ronnie, like, hey, you've got both sets of powers now. You got the throwing the fireballs and the transmuting power. So we can take him out. Just do what I say. And he walks him through like the chemical process of how to freeze the air around Helix in order to snuff out because he's just living fire. In order to snuff out the fire of Helix, he turns him into like an ice thing, and then they start trying to like break him apart because he's clearly a threat. So they start trying to break him apart. But then Ronnie's like, something's happening. We got to go. And he immediately shoots up into the upper atmosphere. Just far enough for like a giant nuclear explosion to happen. And he falls back down to Earth. And at that point, I believe it's Jason who's narrating. It's just like, yeah, no, we're still like a living nuclear bomb. And we have to live with that every time. So they fall back down to Earth. They wake up sometime later and they realize like, yep, that happened. And now we are no longer Firestorm the Nuclear Men. We are Firestorm the Nuclear Man, singular. And anytime they touch now, they will become Firestorm. So yeah, it's an interesting transition. The fact they're doing this in a Zero issue, like it is technically an origin for how the new Firestorm starts, this one person body thing, but it also, much like the rest of this book, doesn't really quite give enough explanation for me to feel like I get it. Like, it's just like, oh, our powers don't exist, but they kind of do. So both of us combined is going to be... It's like soft magic rules, where it's like, you don't need to understand it. It just accept that it's happening. And that, I don't know, for something so science-based as Firestorm, I feel like that's not something I feel works. So overall, do I like the concept? I guess. It's not anything great, but I mean, at least I'm following it now, I think. Honestly, this book has just thrown me so off track in terms of like what actually is happening here that this may as well just be a fresh start as far as I'm concerned, where they're like, yep, now this is our power set now, ignore all that stuff that happened before. And if that's the case, I'm fine with it, but I can't give it anything higher than really a 6.5. Like, it's okay, it's not doing anything offensive, but like, it's completely average in that regard. So I'm interested to see how they might add these new twists and turns to it, what with them having to share a body, but this particular issue wasn't great.